Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you tales of resilience, hope, and transformation. Today, we dive into the compelling journey of Emily, a devoted mother and wife whose seemingly perfect life was shattered by betrayal. When she discovers her husband's dark secrets, Emily is forced to confront the painful truth and fight for herself and her children. Her story is one of heartbreak and strength, proving that even in the darkest moments, we can find the courage to rebuild. Subscribe to our channel to begin today's story and be inspired by Emily's remarkable journey. The day started like any other. The sun rose steadily over the suburban streets, casting a golden glow over Emily's quiet neighborhood. Inside her home, the routine played out almost automatically. Emily turned off her alarm, tied her hair into a loose bun, and walked to the kitchen. The house was still, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the wooden floor under her slippers. She moved through her morning tasks with practiced precision, brewing coffee, toasting bread, and preparing lunchboxes for her children, Brandon and Emma. On the surface, Emily's life appeared perfect. Her home was warm and inviting, lovingly decorated with her touch. Her husband, David, was a successful executive. Her children were bright and full of life. Yet beneath this idyllic facade, Emily felt a growing emptiness. Somewhere along the way, she had lost herself. The vibrant, hopeful woman she once was had been replaced by someone going through the motions. David came downstairs as she placed his coffee on the counter. He didn't look at her. Instead, he muttered a barely audible thanks before scrolling through his phone. Emily smiled faintly, though her chest ached at the indifference in his gesture. It had been years since David showed her the warmth he used to. His distance, once chalked up to the demands of his career, now felt more intentional. As the morning unfolded, chaos replaced the quiet. Brandon and Emma rushed down the stairs, laughing and fighting over who would get the last slice of toast. David gave a perfunctory "see you later" before heading out the door. Emily stayed behind, helping the children with their backpacks and ushering them off to school. When the house finally fell silent, she exhaled deeply, allowing herself a rare moment to feel the heaviness she had carried for years. But today would not be ordinary. Later that afternoon, Emily passed David's home office, where the door was ajar. His voice caught her attention. She stopped, intending to ask about dinner plans, but the words she overheard froze her in place. "Fine. Tomorrow I'll throw her out. I'm fed up. It's time to start over with you." The room spun. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought David might hear it. Who was he talking to? Who was he planning to throw out? The realization struck like a lightning bolt. Could he mean her? The thought was incomprehensible. They had built a life together, raised children. But the tone in his voice was unmistakable, calm, calculating, and resolute. Emily crept back to the kitchen, her legs trembling with every step. She leaned against the counter, clutching its edge for support. The words replayed in her mind. Her perfect world was crumbling. Questions flooded her thoughts, each one sharper than the last. How long had this been going on? Who was the other woman? And why? Why wasn't she enough? The rest of the day passed in a haze. She picked up the children from school, took them to the park, and even smiled at their jokes. But her mind was elsewhere. When Brandon asked why she seemed quiet, Emily forced a cheerful reply, masking the storm inside her. She couldn't let them see her unravel, not yet. That night, after David had gone to bed, Emily sat in the dimly lit living room. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards. Her mind raced, torn between anger and despair. But beneath the hurt, a spark of determination began to flicker. She couldn't ignore what she had heard. She needed answers. Quietly, she walked upstairs to their bedroom. David was fast asleep, his phone resting on the nightstand. Emily hesitated, her fingers hovering over the device. This wasn't her. She wasn't the type to snoop. But desperation silenced her conscience. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone and entered the password, one she had learned long ago. Almost by accident. What she found shattered the last fragments of trust she had clung to. There were messages to a woman named Sophia, filled with words of affection and promises of a future together. One message stood out like a dagger to the heart. Emily doesn't suspect a thing. But I'm tired of her mediocrity. Emily felt her breath catch, her chest tightening as if the weight of the words had pressed the air from her lungs. She scrolled further, uncovering discussions about financial plans and secret meetings. Sophia wasn't just a mistress, she was complicit in something far darker. Emily put the phone back and retreated to the bathroom. Staring at her reflection, she saw a woman she barely recognized, tired, defeated, but still standing. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she looked deeper, searching for the strength she knew must still be there. This wasn't the end, she told herself. This was the beginning of a fight for her life and the lives of her children. By the time Emily returned to bed, her mind was clearer. She didn't have all the answers yet. But one thing was certain, she wouldn't allow David to take everything from her. She wouldn't let him destroy the world she had worked so hard to build for Brandon and Emma. As the first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains the next morning, Emily rose with a new resolve. She would face this betrayal head-on. She didn't know what her next steps would be, but she was determined to protect her children and find the strength she had forgotten she possessed. This was the moment her life changed forever. The Emily who had silently endured years of indifference was gone. In her place was a woman ready to reclaim her life. One step at a time. Emily spent the next day in a fog, the weight of David's betrayal pressing heavily on her chest. She moved through her routine, preparing breakfast, helping the kids with their homework, and tidying the house, but her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, heartbreak, confusion, and a flicker of determination all vied for control. By the time the house was quiet, she knew she couldn't carry this alone. She needed someone to help her untangle the web of deceit David had woven. There was only one person Emily trusted with this kind of vulnerability, Sarah. It had been years since they'd spoken. Their friendship had crumbled over an argument when Sarah warned Emily about David's controlling tendencies. Back then, Emily had been too blinded by love and loyalty to see the truth. But now, Sarah's words echoed in her mind like a warning she should have heeded. Picking up her phone, Emily hesitated. What if Sarah didn't want to speak to her? What if the years of silence had made their friendship irreparable? But the thought of facing this alone was too much to bear. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number. Hello. Sarah's voice on the other end was cautious but familiar. Emily hesitated, her throat tightening. Sarah. It's me. Emily. There was a pause. Emily. Sarah's tone softened. But there was a hint of surprise. I didn't expect to hear from you. Is everything okay? Emily couldn't hold back anymore. Her voice broke as she began to tell Sarah everything, the conversation she overheard, the messages on David's phone, and the sense of betrayal that had consumed her. She tried to keep her composure, but the pain spilled out like a dam breaking. I'm so sorry I didn't listen to you back then, Emily said, her voice shaking. You were right about him. I just didn't want to believe it. Sarah was silent for a moment before speaking, her tone firm but kind. Emily, I don't care about the past right now. What matters is that you're reaching out. You don't have to go through this alone. Hearing those words, Emily felt a wave of relief. For the first time since discovering David's betrayal, she didn't feel entirely isolated. Sarah listened intently as Emily poured out every detail, occasionally asking questions or offering words of encouragement. First things first, Sarah said. You need to protect yourself and the kids. Document everything. The messages, the bank transfers, anything that shows what he's been doing. You're not just dealing with infidelity. This goes deeper. Emily nodded, though Sarah couldn't see her. I don't even know where to start. You start by gathering evidence, Sarah said firmly. And you need someone who can help you understand what's happening inside the company. What about that guy? What was his name? Lucas. He used to work with David. Right. Emily remembered Lucas. One of David's employees. He had always been polite and professional at company events. Though he never seemed particularly close to David. Emily decided to take Sarah's advice and reach out to him. If anyone knew what was happening behind the scenes, it was Lucas. The next morning, after dropping the kids at school, Emily found Lucas's contact information and called him. He sounded surprised to hear from her but agreed to meet at a cafe near his office. When they met, Lucas looked concerned but attentive. Emily, it's good to see you. But this sounds serious. What's going on? Emily hesitated, unsure where to begin. But as she started explaining, Lucas listened carefully, his expression growing darker with every detail. When she mentioned the messages and the suspicious bank activity, he nodded grimly. I've had my doubts about David for a while, Lucas admitted. There's been some strange activity in the company's accounts, large sums being transferred to offshore accounts. But I didn't have enough proof to say anything. Emily's heart sank. It was worse than she thought. Do you think you can help me figure out what's going on? Lucas didn't hesitate. I'll do what I can. But Emily, you need to be careful. If David finds out you're investigating, he might retaliate. That evening, Emily felt a mix of hope and fear. She now had Sarah and Lucas on her side. But the path ahead was daunting. She spent hours poring over her findings, copying messages and noting details from the conversations between David and Sophia. Each piece of evidence felt like another crack in the foundation of the life she thought she had. As she worked, a memory surfaced, a time early in their marriage when David had held her close and promised they would face anything together. That memory now felt like a cruel joke, a reminder of how far they had drifted apart. But instead of dwelling on the pain, Emily used it as fuel. She was fighting for her children, for the future they deserved, and for the woman she was determined to become. The next morning, as the sun rose over her neighborhood, Emily felt a shift within herself. She wasn't just reacting to David's betrayal anymore, she was taking control. The road ahead would be difficult, but she was no longer alone. With Sarah and Lucas's support, Emily was ready to uncover the truth and protect what mattered most. This was just the beginning of her fight. And for the first time in years, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. Emily's days took on a new rhythm, one dictated by her quiet investigation into David's betrayal, while Brandon and Emma remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around them. Emily became a master of disguise. She kept up the appearance of a devoted mother and wife, even as she worked behind the scenes to gather the evidence that would protect her children and secure her future. Every night, after David had gone to bed, she resumed her silent ritual. Armed with the information Lucas had provided, Emily carefully sifted through David's emails, financial statements, and text messages. Each discovery added another piece to the puzzle. There were messages between David and Sophia discussing large bank transfers to an offshore account. They referenced a man named Alex, whose name appeared frequently in emails and contracts. The deeper Emily dug, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a case of infidelity. David, Sophia, and Alex were entangled in a web of financial deceit. Lucas proved to be an invaluable ally. He worked quietly within the company, uncovering irregularities that pointed to fraudulent activity. One evening, he called Emily with a discovery that sent chills down her spine. Emily, I found proof of a major transfer David approved last month. Lucas said. It's tied to an account under Alex's name. There's also a document where David pledges part of his personal assets as collateral for an investment that doesn't exist. Emily gripped the phone tightly, her heart racing. What does this mean? It means they're moving fast, Lucas replied. And they're using company resources to do it. If they succeed, They could drain everything before anyone notices. The weight of the situation hit Emily like a tidal wave. She realized she wasn't just fighting for herself and her children, she was trying to stop a scheme that could ruin countless lives. Despite the mounting pressure, Emily remained outwardly composed. During the day, she juggled the demands of motherhood, taking Brandon and Emma to school, helping with homework, and preparing meals. Her children were her anchor, their laughter and innocence reminding her why she was fighting so hard. She couldn't let them see her worry, so she hid her fears behind a smile. Her evenings, however, were consumed by her growing investigation. Emily enlisted Sarah's help to organize the evidence, creating a detailed timeline of David's actions. Sarah's no-nonsense attitude was a steadying force. She pushed Emily to think strategically, reminding her that every move she made could have long-term consequences. "Emily, you're doing this for the right reasons," Sarah said one night as they worked together in Emily's kitchen. "But you need to be smart. David isn't the type to back down easily. He'll fight to protect himself, no matter who he has to hurt." Those words stuck with Emily. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. Her children's future depended on her ability to outmaneuver David and his accomplices. One afternoon, while Brandon and Emma played in the backyard, Emily received an unexpected visitor. Charlotte, her neighbor, stood at the door, clutching her phone. Emily opened the door, surprised to see the normally reserved woman looking visibly unsettled. "Charlotte, is everything okay?" Emily asked. Charlotte hesitated before speaking. "I don't know if I should be telling you this, but I saw David last week. He was at that new restaurant downtown. And he wasn't alone. There was a woman with him. They looked close." Emily's stomach dropped, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Do you remember what she looked like?" Charlotte nodded. "She was younger. Brunette. Very polished. I thought it might be a work meeting at first. But something about the way they were sitting. I don't know. It didn't feel right." Emily thanked Charlotte, her mind racing. This confirmed what she already knew. But hearing it from someone else brought a fresh wave of anger and determination. After Charlotte left, Emily sat at her dining table, staring at the folder where she kept all the evidence. The situation was spiraling, but she couldn't let it overwhelm her. That evening, Lucas called with another update. "Emily, I think Alex might be the key to all of this. He's not just an accomplice, he's orchestrating a lot of these transactions. I found emails between him and Sophia discussing plans to cut David out once they're done using him." Emily's breath caught. The betrayal ran deeper than she'd imagined. David wasn't just hurting her, he was being used himself. Despite her anger toward him, a flicker of pity emerged. But that pity was fleeting. He had chosen this path, and his choices were endangering her family's future. As Emily tucked Brandon and Emma into bed that night, she felt the weight of her responsibility more acutely than ever. Brandon, with his sensitive nature, had already started noticing the tension at home. He looked up at her with wide, questioning eyes as she kissed his forehead. "Mom, is Dad mad at us?" he asked softly. Emily's heart broke at the innocence of his question. "No, sweetheart," she said, stroking his hair. "Dad loves you very much. Sometimes adults have problems, but it's not your fault." Brandon nodded, but Emily could see the doubt in his eyes. She promised herself she would protect him and Emma from the chaos as much as she could. That night, Emily stared at the growing pile of evidence on her desk. She was closer to the truth, but the road ahead was still fraught with uncertainty. One thing, however, was clear: she wouldn't let David, Sophia, or Alex destroy everything she held dear. The fight was just beginning. The evening Emily decided to confront David was a calculated one. For weeks, she had gathered evidence, built alliances, and planned her every move. The folder of documents now held everything she needed: bank transfers, emails, and Lucas's detailed findings. But what pushed her to act was a recording Lucas had sent her the night before. It was a conversation between Sophia and Alex, where they openly discussed their plan to strip David of everything once he had served his purpose. The betrayal was not just personal, it was systemic. Emily knew the time had come. She chose to stage the confrontation during a dinner that evening. It wasn't an impulsive decision but a tactical move. She prepared David's favorite meal, set the table with care, and even put on a dress she hadn't worn in years, one she knew he would recognize. Everything was deliberate, designed to disarm him. Sophia, however, was an unplanned addition to the night's events. Earlier in the day, Emily had invited her under the pretense of wanting to meet the woman David often praised as a key business partner. Emily's calm demeanor hid her true intentions. Sophia's arrival would bring everything to a head. When the doorbell rang, Emily took a steadying breath and opened it. Sophia stood there, polished and poised, her confidence bordering on arrogance. "Thank you for inviting me, Emily," she said, flashing a polite smile. Emily returned the smile with practiced ease. "Of course. Sophia. Please. Come in." David arrived moments later, his expression freezing when he saw Sophia seated at the dining table. "Sophia," he said, his voice strained. "What are you doing here?" Emily didn't give him time to respond. "I thought it would be nice to meet someone you've spoken so highly of," she said, setting the last dish on the table. "After all, transparency is important, don't you think?" David forced a smile, but his unease was palpable. The dinner began with superficial conversation, small talk about the weather, work, and the children. Sophia played her role well, maintaining her charm while subtly glancing at David for cues. But Emily could feel the tension building, and she knew it was time to act. After the main course, Emily stood and walked to the sideboard where the folder waited. She placed it on the table in front of David and took her seat. "David," she began, her voice steady but firm, "there's something we need to discuss. Something that concerns all of us here." David's brows furrowed as he opened the folder. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages, copies of emails, bank transfers, and the incriminating recording transcript. Sophia, seated across from him, grew visibly tense as she realized what was happening. "What is this?" David demanded, his voice sharp. Emily met his gaze, her expression unyielding. "This is the truth, David. The truth about what you've been doing with Sophia. The truth about the financial schemes you've been orchestrating. And the truth about how Sophia and Alex have been planning to betray you." Sophia's face drained of color. "This is absurd," she said, her voice rising. "Emily, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Emily interrupted, her calm tone cutting through the air. "I understand that you and Alex have been using David. And I have the proof to back it up." David looked at Sophia, confusion and anger flashing across his face. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice cracking. Sophia opened her mouth to protest, but before she could speak, the doorbell rang. Emily rose and opened the door to reveal Lucas, holding a small device in his hand. "I think this will clarify things," Lucas said, stepping inside. He pressed play, and the room filled with the sound of Sophia and Alex's voices discussing their plans. The recording was damning, leaving no room for doubt. The silence that followed was deafening. David turned to Sophia, his expression a mix of disbelief and fury. "How could you do this to me?" Sophia stammered, her polished exterior crumbling. "David, it's not what it seems." David slammed his hand on the table, rising abruptly. "Not what it seems. You've been planning this behind my back the entire time?" Emily stayed seated, watching the chaos unfold. She had no intention of intervening. David needed to face the consequences of his choices. When he finally turned to her, desperation in his eyes, she remained firm. "Emily, we can fix this," he pleaded. "You don't have to do this." She shook her head, her voice resolute. "This ended long ago, David. What happens next will be decided in court." Sophia tried to leave. But Lucas blocked her path. "Not so fast," he said. "The authorities will be very interested in hearing your side of the story." As Sophia slumped back into her seat, Emily felt a strange sense of peace. This wasn't the end of her battle, but it was the beginning of justice. For too long, she had been a silent participant in her own life. Now, she was taking control. That night, after David left, Emily sat in her children's room, watching them sleep. Their peaceful faces reminded her why she had fought so hard. This was only the first step, but it was a step toward a future where she and her children could thrive, free from the shadows of David's betrayal. The confrontation at dinner was a turning point, but it was far from the end of Emily's journey. What came next was grueling, a series of legal battles that tested her resolve and forced her to confront the full extent of David's betrayal. As she prepared for the courtroom, Emily relied heavily on the network of support she had built. Lucas continued providing critical evidence. Sarah offered unwavering emotional strength. And Charlotte, her neighbor, shared an important photograph she had taken, David and Sophia entering a hotel together. Every piece of evidence strengthened her case. But the fight was far from over. David didn't back down easily. His lawyer filed motion after motion, challenging Emily's claims and attempting to discredit her. Emily had anticipated this. David was a man who thrived on control, and the thought of losing everything, his family, his reputation, and his financial stability, was intolerable to him. The courtroom became a battleground. Emily sat across from David, her posture composed but her emotions churning beneath the surface. He had always been a confident man, but now there was a fragility to him, a desperation he couldn't quite conceal. His lawyer painted him as a misunderstood husband who had been led astray by bad influences. They tried to deflect blame onto Sophia and Alex, claiming David had been manipulated into participating in their schemes. But Emily's lawyer, armed with the evidence she and Lucas had painstakingly gathered, was relentless. Emails, bank transfers, and recordings painted a damning picture. The judge listened intently as Emily's team laid out the timeline of deceit, highlighting David's role in the financial fraud and his neglect as a father. One of the most critical moments came when Lucas testified. He detailed the irregularities he had discovered within the company and explained how David had personally signed off on questionable transactions. Lucas's testimony was clear, concise, and devastating for David's case. The court also heard from Charlotte, who described what she had witnessed, David with Sophia at the hotel and their behavior, which left little doubt about their relationship. Her testimony added weight to the evidence of David's infidelity and cast doubt on his claims of being a dedicated family man. Throughout the proceedings, Emily remained calm, even as David's lawyer attempted to paint her as emotionally unstable. They questioned her ability to raise Brandon and Emma, suggesting she was using the children as pawns in a vindictive plot against David. Emily expected this tactic and refused to be rattled. When it was her turn to testify, she spoke with quiet strength, describing the impact of David's betrayal on her family and her determination to protect her children. "This isn't about revenge," she told the court. "It's about ensuring my children grow up in a stable, loving environment. They deserve better than the chaos David has brought into our lives." Her words resonated deeply, even with those who had no stake in the case. The judge observed Emily closely, nodding slightly as she spoke. She could feel the tide turning in her favor. Sophia and Alex were also called to testify. Their stories, riddled with inconsistencies and attempts to shift blame, only solidified the case against David. Alex, in particular, tried to minimize his involvement, but the evidence proved otherwise. His arrogance and lack of remorse were glaring, making it clear that he and Sophia had been the masterminds behind the fraud. When the final day of the trial arrived, Emily sat in the courtroom, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her lawyer delivered a powerful closing argument, emphasizing the harm David's actions had caused not only to Emily and their children but also to the company and its employees. David's lawyer, though competent, couldn't overcome the mountain of evidence against him. The judge's ruling came swiftly and decisively. David was found guilty of financial misconduct and ordered to pay substantial restitution to the company. He was also stripped of any claim to the family's assets. Most importantly, Emily was granted full custody of Brandon and Emma, with David's visitation rights limited to supervised sessions. The judge cited David's negligence as a father and his lack of accountability as key reasons for the decision. When the ruling was announced, Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had fought tirelessly for this moment. And now, justice had been served. David slumped in his chair, his face a mask of disbelief. For the first time, Emily saw him for what he truly was, a man undone by his own choices. As she left the courthouse, Emily was greeted by Sarah and Lucas, who had been waiting anxiously for the outcome. Sarah enveloped her in a tight hug, whispering, "You did it, Emily. You fought for what mattered most." Lucas smiled warmly. "This is just the beginning. Now you can focus on what's really important, your future and your kids." Emily nodded, tears of gratitude filling her eyes. She looked up at the sky, the weight on her chest finally lifting. The battle had been long and painful, but she had emerged stronger, more resilient, and ready to rebuild her life. That evening, as Brandon and Emma played in the garden, Emily watched them from the porch. Their laughter was a balm to her soul, a reminder of why she had fought so hard. For the first time in years, she felt free. Her journey wasn't over, but the darkest chapter of her life had finally come to a close. Now, she could look to the future with hope. The days following the court's decision were a whirlwind of emotions for Emily. Relief mingled with exhaustion as she began to piece her life back together. For so long, her energy had been consumed by uncovering the truth and fighting for justice. Now, with the weight of David's betrayal no longer hanging over her, she felt both unmoored and liberated. The future stretched before her like a blank canvas, and for the first time in years, she could decide how to fill it. Emily's first priority was Brandon and Emma. They had been the center of her world throughout the ordeal, and she wanted to ensure they felt secure and loved as they adjusted to this new chapter. She decided to focus on creating a sense of normalcy for them, enrolling them in activities they had always wanted to try. Brandon, with his quiet sensitivity, chose drawing classes, while Emma, ever the bundle of energy, wanted to learn the piano. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and Emily threw herself into supporting their new interests. She rearranged a corner of the living room to accommodate a small keyboard for Emma and often found herself sitting beside her daughter, clapping along as Emma mastered simple melodies. Meanwhile, Brandon transformed a section of Emily's design studio into his own art space, filling it with sketchbooks and pencils. Emily encouraged his creativity, marveling at his talent and the way his drawings expressed emotions he couldn't yet articulate in words. The house itself also began to change. Emily repainted the walls in soft, warm tones and rearranged the furniture to create a more open and inviting space. It was a symbolic act, a way to reclaim her home from the shadows of her past with David. Each brushstroke felt like a step toward healing, and every change she made reflected the new life she was building for herself and her children. As her focus shifted to her design studio, Emily felt a renewed passion for her work. She and Lucas had decided to formalize their partnership, transforming the studio into a thriving business. Lucas's knack for managing operations complemented Emily's creative vision, and together they began attracting clients who valued their approach. One of their first major projects was a campaign for a non-profit organization that supported women rebuilding their lives after domestic and financial abuse. For Emily, the project was deeply personal, and she poured her heart into every detail. The collaboration with Lucas also brought unexpected companionship. Over late nights at the studio, the two grew closer, their conversations evolving from work-related discussions to personal reflections. Lucas's steady support had been a lifeline during her darkest days. And now, Emily found herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone else. He listened without judgment, offering encouragement when she doubted herself and reminding her of the strength she had shown. One evening, as they finished reviewing a project, Lucas looked at her with a rare vulnerability. "Emily," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "you've been through so much. And yet you've come out stronger. Watching you rebuild your life has been incredible." Emily felt her cheeks flush. She had spent so long questioning her worth that hearing those words made her pause. "I couldn't have done it alone," she admitted. "You've been here every step of the way." Their bond grew naturally, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. For Emily, it wasn't about replacing what she had lost but discovering something entirely new. Lucas understood her past without judgment and encouraged her to embrace her future without fear. While her personal life blossomed, Emily remained vigilant about maintaining her children's stability. She was acutely aware of how the past year had affected them, particularly Brandon, whose perceptiveness often revealed truths he wasn't ready to voice. One night, as she tucked him into bed, he asked quietly, "Mom, are we going to be okay now?" Emily sat beside him, brushing his hair back gently. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, her voice steady. "We're going to be more than okay. Things might feel different for a while, but I promise we'll always have each other." Brandon nodded, his small hand reaching for hers. "I like it when you smile. Mom, you didn't used to smile as much." His words stayed with her long after he drifted off to sleep. They reminded her that the fight she had endured wasn't just for justice, it was for moments like this. For the chance to create a life filled with love and laughter. As the weeks turned into months, Emily began to see the fruits of her efforts. The studio thrived. Brandon and Emma flourished in their activities. And her home became a haven of peace and joy. She even found herself reconnecting with old friends, including Sarah, whose unwavering support had been a pillar of strength throughout the ordeal. Their renewed friendship was a reminder of the power of forgiveness and the importance of surrounding herself with people who truly cared. On a crisp fall afternoon, Emily took Brandon and Emma to the beach, a place that had always brought her a sense of calm. Lucas joined them, and together they watched the children collect seashells and splash in the waves. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Emily felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had faced betrayal, heartache, and uncertainty, but she had emerged stronger than she ever thought possible. Looking out at the endless expanse of the ocean, Emily realized that her story wasn't defined by what she had lost but by what she had gained: her independence, her children's happiness, and the promise of a future she could shape on her own terms. With Lucas by her side and Brandon and Emma leading the way, she was ready to embrace whatever came next. This was her new beginning, and it was hers to write. As the waves gently lapped at the shore and the sun dipped beneath the horizon, Emily stood on the beach, watching Brandon and Emma laugh as they collected seashells. Beside her, Lucas smiled, their hands loosely intertwined. The journey had been long and filled with pain, but it had also taught Emily resilience, the power of love, and the importance of reclaiming her own story. For the first time in years, she felt a profound peace, a reminder that life, no matter how challenging, always offers the chance for renewal. This was not just the end of a chapter but the beginning of a brighter, stronger future. Thank you for joining us on Emily's transformative journey. If her story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel, Life Stories, for more tales of resilience, love, and hope. See you in our next story.